Charles.
How are you, Paul? Good?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, nice to see you.
I'll go and get some coffee. I'll be ready. Otherwise, I will require.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello to you and welcome to this, the second day of LORCA Live. I'm Ben Thompson from BBC News and BBC Breakfast, and I'm with you for the next hour to guide you through the discussions and introduce you to the great speakers that we have lined up for today's session. Now, a reminder, every day we are looking at some of the most important challenges and opportunities facing the cybersecurity community across the UK and around the world. We're speaking to entrepreneurs, investors, government departments, vendors and global tech companies to understand how future cyber innovations will redefine the industry. The global pandemic has forced firms of all sizes to speed up their digital transformation. Remote working has created new opportunities, but it's also left some systems vulnerable to attack. And the rise in online banking and e-commerce, that's changed how we do everyday tasks, but it's also opened the door to hackers and other malicious actors. So today, we will ask, how will the cyber community respond as the world emerges from this pandemic? What cyber technologies will meet the world's new IT needs? And what are the biggest growth opportunities for startups and early stage businesses? Now, before we begin, I want to thank our event sponsors. They are Adobe, Splunk, BAE Systems and Infosec. Our primary LORCA partners, who are Lloyds Banking Group and Dell Technologies, and our delivery partners, Plexel, Deloitte and Queen's University Belfast. Our thanks to them. And as with yesterday, do check out the workshops that you can sign up for on the LORCA Live website. And please do get involved. This event is for you. So please submit any questions or comments you might have for our panellists over the next hour. Just use the Q&A function on the website and I'll make sure that you get some answers to your questions. Now, during the pandemic, the World Economic Forum called for a great reset, a chance to reimagine how businesses can have a positive impact on society and a chance for global stakeholders to work together to answer the problems caused or exacerbated by the pandemic. So what role does the cybersecurity industry play in that? And has the pandemic, a global problem, brought about more global collaboration? Well, to discuss it, we have two titans of the cyber security industry. Joining us is Eleanor Fairford, who's the Deputy Director of the Incident Management at the National Cyber Security Centre, and also Troels Erting, who's the former chairman of the World Economic Forum's Centre for Cyber Security. He's also a lecturer and an award-winning Chief Security Officer. Welcome to you both. Maybe I can start with you first, Troels, talking about that great reset. For the uninitiated, maybe just give us a sense, an introduction into what that great reset could look like.
The Great Reset could look like that we will start embracing the problem as a globe. Right now, I think we have never been more, fragmented. We haven't seen so much geopolitical tensions as we do right now. We haven't seen so much state-sponsored crime. And then on top of this, a lot of crime, normal crime. And then, as you said in the introduction, we have also been much, much more, dependent on internet because we cannot meet physically anymore. So we generate much, much more information. So the Great Reset is a response to that fact. Can we actually bring everybody together, the good guys and maybe also some of the bad guys, to see if we can find a way to deal with, just crime? Let's see if we can address crime. First of all, we'll probably not be able to address nation states activity. It will always continue, but could we do something together to do something against crime? And then again, I think that the change in the world as we see it has also created a new group of have-nots and the haves. And I think that the have-nots are actually bigger now than they used to be. And that will also create tensions in this digital transformation as we see it. So it's a very, very difficult picture. I cannot come up with an explanation and say this is how it will look like, because I don't think there are any easy solutions, to be honest. There are no, but if there is a will, there's also a way. And that is why we will, in the World Economic Forum, always be a platform for independent and good and positive cooperation.
Yeah, and Troels, you talk about bringing together the good guys and the bad guys. Let us focus maybe on the bad guys for just a second, because cybersecurity is where they meet, isn't it? Talk to me about the relevance of cybersecurity in this Great Reset.
The relevance is that what tend to blur the picture and make it very, very difficult for, I don't know, we haven't got an estimate, but the majority of the estimates I have tells me that 80% of the unwanted activity on the internet is attributed to criminal groups, and then maybe 8 to 10% to nation states. If this is the picture, then the biggest problem is with criminals. But the challenge we have is that the police in Denmark, in UK, in Russia, in China, in US, and other places cannot cooperate on targeting ordinary crime because it seems to be linked to nation-state activity, and it's in one big basket. When I was a police officer, I could work with Russia and China on drug cases and serial crime cases and serial rape cases, but I cannot work with anybody on cybercrime cases. And that, I think, is the biggest challenge that we have right now, is that this is a nut we have to see if we can cut and find a solution to. And the only way we can do that is that somebody will start to talk to each other, and should we accept crime, regardless if it's done by Russians, or criminal organizations, or Americans, or British, or Brazilians, or whatever, shouldn't we address that? Because cybercrime right now is a risk-free crime. And then we might afterwards see if we can create some kind of norms between nation states. Because let's be honest, they all do crimes on the internet or activities on the internet against each other. Some are more aggressive than other ones. We've seen that with SolarWinds and other examples, but we all do. Do we need some kind of norms in this field, as we have a Geneva Convention for how we conduct war? Even that is also a dirty business. We at least have some rules. Could we have a digital Geneva Convention for that sort of crime, and then other conventions for fighting crimes? But we have nothing. It's the Wild West, basically. So that is why we need a reset in one way or another.
Eleanor Fairford, let me bring you in at this point as well, because look, this pandemic has taught us a lot about maybe our own resilience, the resilience of our economies, our businesses. What has it taught us about the resilience of cybersecurity?
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been clear from the very outset during this pandemic that this would provide, the perfect opportunity for cyber threat actors, both state-sponsored and criminal, to really exploit this increased digital connectivity that we're all undergoing in the current environment. So, we're relying on technology to such a massive extent to connect us, as you described in your introduction. As we work from home, there's a massive threat surface, a potential attack surface that has really increased as a result. We've got more people and more devices online, volumes of code and digital content that can be exploited by multiple actors. So we did very much anticipate from the outset that cybersecurity would have a key role to play as soon as we were all sent home to work from home and to work remotely. And what we did see, I think, as Troels is saying, the biggest threat in this space really is at the hands of those cyber criminals who are seeking to exploit the current environment. We saw huge shifts in the operations of cybercrime, really exploiting the COVID scams and the COVID backdrop as a sort of lure, and capitalizing on the alarm levels to get people to click on links that they really shouldn't have, and that would lead them through to malware and on to further scams. So really exploiting public unease and fear of the pandemic. We did also see, though, some state actors targeting vaccine developers and other cyber activity that kind of reflected the state's shift in intelligence requirements, that kind of reflected what was going on in the geopolitical situation, as Troels was saying. And back in July, the NCSC did warn about Russian cyber attacks that were being launched on coronavirus vaccine developers. So we've seen both, but it is very true that it's the cybercrime landscape that has really expanded to make the most of the current scenario. And in a real life example, we've got a current spate of attacks on education targets, on schools, launching ransomware attacks, where you've got hundreds of students dialing in, remotely working from home, whose credentials are being stolen left, right and centre, who provide easy access into these organisations, who are being picked off by cyber criminal groups and organised groups. So this is a really worrying trend that we're seeing that is really increasing day by day. So I just finish off. I mean, we in the NCSC, we've published guidance to try and help organisations prepare for this sort of thing to increase their cybersecurity, and then steps to take if malicious activity is conducted towards them, things you can do to try and protect yourselves in the current environment. Thank you.
Yeah, and Eleanor, is the message getting through? Are businesses, individuals aware that by flinging open the doors to organisations, to education, to our lives, that actually we need to take much more care than we ever have before, because we are much more exposed than we've ever been before?
I think that's absolutely right, and it's fascinating that you can pump out as much guidance as you possibly can and seek to fill the airwaves with, alarmist messages about the threat that you face. But there's nothing more focusing of the attention than when you actually undergo a cyber attack, right? So the more that we see these things happen, the more we're sort of trying to use them to point to the fact that this is really happening. Businesses are falling prey to this every day and really need to be taking it seriously. So in some respects, this is focusing the mind and helping organisations really recognise it as a live threat that they face.
Yeah, Trolls, I'm interested in whether this can be a coordinated effort, because this goes beyond boundaries, it goes beyond borders, doesn't it? So actually having an internationally joined up approach to tackling this is quite clearly crucial. But is that realistic?
Well, I would love to say yes, but I am a bit hesitant in these days. That I'm not sure that we have the right atmosphere right now. If you'd asked me, even during Trump's administration 2 years ago, I would have tried at least. I think that we have even gone further off track, so to say, that to ask Russians, Chinese, Americans, Europeans, and British to be in the same room and to discuss cybercrime honestly is probably one step or one bridge too far right now. But that shouldn't stop us, of course, from promoting the idea. And I think at a certain point, you will see that the globe is so interconnected that crime against Chinese citizens, Russian citizens, European citizens, American citizens will be a nuisance that will drive up, distrust and cost and whatever. So there might be at some point some kind of clarification that this just greedy, normal, organized crime conducted at the internet is a no-go, and we should start there, I think. And I think that there is a fair chance to have discussions. I'm sure that there are discussions already, in the margins of other meetings to find a solution. But I don't think that you will see a breakthrough, to be honest, in 2021 or 2022. But I think you will see a process. But then we have other challenges after that. You also have, can you hack opinions? Can you hack elections? Can you hack lots of things? And do you actually do that as well to influence, an election or maybe a parliament in another country? And you do that. And we are so much online now. So our various digital, tracking are so intense that you can basically profile anybody, and everything is connected these days. Everything is sensing, everything is being stored, and everything is being either sold or stolen. So this is also a different problem. So you have the crime problem, which I think we should address. Then you have the integrity, let's say privacy problem. And then, of course, you have the state sponsor problem. So you can see I'm not serving a light meal here. There is a lot of work. But again, I'm an optimist, otherwise I wouldn't be in that business here. And I think that we can prevail and we can find solutions. And I see that the necessity is now driving us closer to more cooperation. And the good thing is that in Europe and US and most of the Western countries, we actually are increasing our cooperations, right? So we now need to have some kind of bridges to the Russians and the Chinese as well.
Yeah, and Eleanor, I want to ask you the same sort of question. Is enough collaboration taking place? Is intelligence being shared? Or does it feel like each country is dealing with this on their own and not really having that conversation to tackle this on a global stage?
I think that's a really interesting question, and I think Charles makes a great point that the more that we can foster collaboration, the better. And obviously, but I would just observe that the kind of broader geopolitical tensions and relationships have been kind of exacerbated and exaggerated in the context of the pandemic, and the cyber relationships are kind of reflect that, I would say. So certainly amongst like-minded and friendly countries, that we do see enormous amounts at the moment of collaboration and cyber threat intelligence sharing, coalitions, swapping notes on what we're seeing in terms of the different incidents in our countries, working together. There is some really good joint working on cybercrime, just as you described, Trolls, particularly on issues like ransomware, which hit us all equally and which don't reflect individual kind of bilateral relationships. We're all equal sufferers of the same threat. But I would say that it also has exacerbated some of those tensions with other countries, like the ones that you have named, where we have then seen, cyber espionage conducted. We've seen some of the biggest espionage attacks of our time, sort of during this period, kind of pandemic related or otherwise. And I would say there's still a way to go before we're able to collaborate on those levels. But I think the sentiment is absolutely spot on, and we should be seeking common ground. And cybercrime is potentially one of those areas where we should look to work together. Absolutely.
Yeah, Eleanor, if you sum up the last 12 months, where are we now versus where we were before this pandemic began? Has this seen an exponential rise in the number of attacks and risks because of some of those reasons that you laid out there and some of the opportunities maybe to jump in? Give me a sense of where we were before and where we are now.
I think I would say that what we have seen is a large-scale rise in that kind of low-level commodity cybercrime exploiting the situation. So the COVID scams, the lures, the reliance on technology and how to turn it around and exploit it. We're looking at ways in which you can, hack the new NHS app. We're all reliant on test and trace. Somebody hack and open up huge vulnerabilities.
Eleanor, thank you. We had a little problem with your line, but we will persevere. Just bear with us one sec while we try and sort some of that out. But Trolls, I want to bring you back in as well, because, so much of what we're talking about over these 3 days at LORCA Live is about regaining trust and rebuilding trust in technology. And I wonder if we look from the consumer point of view here, people are more aware of the risks, people are more aware of the problems, people are more aware of some of the cybercrime that is going on. So I wonder what governments may be thinking about to restore trust, because ultimately it is that end user who needs to feel confident using the technology.
Yeah, you're right. And again, I think this is a challenge, right? We are just in the middle of a pandemic where lots of governments will introduce an application where you can trace people, all over. You click in where you are, and that is of course because you want to see if you can target and map the epidemic. But the problem is that you also generate loads of privacy information about my whereabouts, where I am, and all of that. And you have already seen examples both in Israel and in Singapore where these data have been used by police for other cases than to actually deal with the pandemic. So we always in this catch-22 that if you want to buy my trust, you need to be honest and transparent. And then I think I will play along. But if you're not, and you can be not in two folds, either you can change and you can say, now we will allow the police to use it because it's an important case, or you can be sloppy around securing these data and then they will be stolen from you, which is just as bad. So I think that there are many catches in this, and you must realize that we have gone through 3 years of digital transformation in 3 months due to the pandemic. So we have really moved fast, and maybe also too fast, but that's how life is if you want to keep the world spinning and the wheel spinning. But we have to stop up probably and look back and say, how can we gain the British citizens' trust, the Danish, the Americans? And I don't think it's an easy game, even though you will say there is a generation split here, that some of the elder are more careful about their privacy. The youngsters, they don't seem to care. I'm not sure that's true. So we will have a lot of discussion in this area. And again, I'm not serving a light and easy meal here, because you will have to fight two things. You want to fight the pandemic. On the other side, you want to keep people's trust. Can you do both? If so, you need to be a good politician that sticks to what you promised and what you say, and are not, trying to change that when times change. But politicians don't have a good reputation for that. So, on the other side, you need to be straightforward on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And Eleanor, maybe a final word from you, because Troll's really highlighting there quite how much has changed over the last year. Give me a sense of whether enough has been done to reassure consumers, the end users of this technology, that their data will be used for the purposes that it is intended to be used for, and that they can feel safe handing over this sort of information.
I think you're absolutely right. There is a huge responsibility now on government and on technology providers to provide that assurance. Although it is true that for many consumers, it feels it's easier than for others to just hand over data and be relatively relaxed about it. At the same time, I don't think that it should not be the responsibility of the individual to be able to maintain their own cyber hygiene in this kind of context. The companies need to make it easy for the individual by taking away the risk. So the responsibility sits with government and with technology providers to really make it as easy as possible for individual citizens to protect themselves.
It's been so fascinating speaking to you both. I'm really grateful for your time this afternoon. To Ellen and to Trolls, thank you so much. It really is interesting, isn't it, quite how much has changed, and maybe perhaps we'll look back on this last 12 months and wonder quite how quickly things change and the new normal that we are getting used to. So quite clearly, the pandemic has reminded us just how incredible science and technology can be in solving the world's problems. But as we've been discussing there too, it also demonstrates many of its vulnerabilities. Technology has the power to transform our lives, but of course it has to be resilient if we are coming to rely on it. So would you drive a driverless car if you thought it could be hacked? Would you go on a holiday with a vaccine passport if you thought that could be compromised? So in our next panel, we'll look at what new technologies have the potential to radically alter our lives if cybersecurity professionals can guarantee their safety. So let me introduce you to our panel this afternoon. With us is Paul Branley, who is the Director of Strategy, Innovation and Testing at Lloyds Banking Group. Emma Lindley, who is a digital identity and data privacy expert, the co-founder of Women in Identity and a board member for Trust Stamp. Mark Woods is the Chief Technical Advisor for EMEA at Splunk, and they are with us this afternoon. Welcome to you all, welcome to LORCA Live. And I hope you were able to hear some of that previous panel there with Eleanor and Trolls, because it gives us a fascinating basis on which to start this discussion. Paul, maybe I can start with you here, because trust really one of the issues that came out of that first discussion, wasn't it? How can we as consumers trust the technology that we use? Do you think there is a trust issue here?
Yeah, I thought it was a great summary by Trolls and Eleanor, to be honest. I actually think, Ben, that there's always been issues with trust, historically, throughout time. I also actually personally think there always will be issues with trust. It seems to me like, as was summed up by Trolls and Eleanor, that we're now in a more interconnected world, more than ever. Society's more interconnected, globally, countries, individuals, we're all interconnected. And it's driven by technology. And yet, despite that connectedness, it feels like we're more divided and more fragmented than ever before at times. And I think really in the digital domain, I think it's easy to see that lack of trust. I think lack of trust is rife. I think we're seeing data breaches every week. We're seeing ransomware attacks every few days. We've heard about the nation state attacks recently, nations targeting not just other nations, but, organizations and individuals within those nations. Like SolarWinds and Hafnium and so on. And also as individuals, I think we're seeing scams, we're seeing smishing texts, we're seeing phishing emails. And I think the facts speak for themselves, to be honest, which was again summed up very well previously. Cybercrime is increasing, the stats are showing that it's growing. Surveillance is increasing, sometimes by need, but it's sometimes abused. And I think it's easy to see why people are beginning to feel that, security is failing a little bit in the cyber domain.
Mark, let me bring you in here too, because look, so many new technologies that we have adopted over the last 12 months and so many opportunities given our sort of willingness to embrace new technology. But I suppose that will all boil down once again to trust. Do we trust this technology to serve us, but also, with the information that we are providing and putting out there, can we be reassured that the data, the information we provide will be used for the right things?
Well, I think part of the challenge there is about visibility and accessibility. So lots of the time when we talk about this, we start to look at one endpoint use of that data. But actually, as we've seen with building trust or with building ways to do things better, that actually the more that we can access that data and the more that we can share that in the right kind of way, the more we can start to build trust, but also to start to build opportunities. The interesting thing for me within the cyber domain is that we're starting to move away from just how we build high walls to protect, because with the future, that's never going to be a strategy that's going to be successful, and it's incredibly costly. But actually, if we're able to really understand how our businesses and organizations are operating, and start to share that visibility and accessibility as widely as possible, then we're able to get to that future where we can start to build trust in the right way, but also we can start to uncover some of those areas. So some of these areas that we've seen with breaches and attacks, it's not that they didn't happen before, it's just we didn't really see them. And actually the most important thing with building that trust is to make sure that our services are more resilient and we understand those, rather than actually trying to hide those things.
And Emma, let's talk about maybe digital identities, because it's really coming to the fore when we talk about things like vaccine passports, for example, and that will require a huge amount of technological innovation, but also public trust. And I wonder, what it means for digital identities. Are we on board? And what are the sort of hurdles that need to be addressed before people can, really throw their weight behind something like that?
So I think it's interesting because we're using the word trust a lot, and trust is actually a very subjective word. And so I think that particularly in the domain of digital identity, what we have to start talking about is frameworks that allow us to instill trust, both at the consumer end and the organisation end. So that includes things like liability frameworks. It includes accountability. It includes governance, and that's actually how we instill trust. So if you look at the General Data Protection Regulation, that has allowed users to be able to have some recourse for their data being misused. And really, that's what I think when we start to talk about subjective things about like trust, we actually need to be talking about frameworks. Now, in the world of digital identities, if we look at the UK, we don't actually have a digital identity framework in the UK like they do have in other countries. And that has a whole set of challenges for us, particularly, and the light has been shone on the challenges that we have with the pandemic, because it's meant that people haven't been able to do things digitally in a way as securely as perhaps we would have liked them to have done. Now, one of the challenges that I have when we look at things like vaccine credentials or the ability to be able to show your vaccine certificate is if we start to link it to something like a digital identity, which we don't have a ubiquitous one that everybody can have in the UK, we actually start to build in potential exclusionary practices instead of being able to allow everybody that has one of these credentials be able to go wherever they need to go. We have the NHS in the UK, which is a great thing. Everyone can get access to a vaccine and also should be able to get access to a vaccine credential. So I don't think at this point in the UK we have the ability to be able to link those two things together because we don't have the plumbing, the digital identity system to pin it onto.
Yeah, and Mark, you're nodding along there. I wonder, how quickly that might happen, if indeed it can happen in the UK. And as we're hearing from Emma about the challenges that need to be overcome for it to be able to happen.
So I think the hard point when we're talking about data in this way is we're not talking about the systems that start to serve those products or services, but actually how we understand how they're being used and how they're connected together. And it's entirely correct to talk about frameworks for how you do it, because the first part of that is a ethos and a culture change to go to actually saying that we should be able to share, and then you can have a discussion about how. Technologically, actually, this is a solved problem, and we can do this now. There is some incredible new innovations in technology that are coming through at sort of point solutions and biometrics and how you potentially verify that, but actually in sharing the data, it's a solved problem. And I think that sometimes is where we get tied in knots when we talk about innovation in this space. Actually, the technology to do that sharing, the frameworks to pull in place technologically are there. What we need is the culture shift, and then to focus our innovation on those areas where we might need other ways to verify, where we might need other point solutions in place.
Paul, let me bring you back in, because there's a tendency for us to think about this as just being a consumer issue and it's about consumers trusting the technology, but there's a business element to this as well, isn't there? Talk me through some of the risks that businesses are facing as far as trust is concerned.
Yeah, it is interesting what sort of Emma and Mark have just said. So I think Mark's right. I think that there are some technologies today available that can help with this problem, but I think a lot of us are sort of using technologies from the past which aren't geared up. So I do think it's really important that we try to press reset, if I'm honest, on some of the legacy technologies that exist. And one area that we're really pushing into, and lots of other firms are, is really moving to cloud. And I think cloud offers a big opportunity for us, to raise the bar, to raise the standards on some of the technology issues. And then clearly then that leads into, if the cloud providers are providing this, it leads into third-party assurance as a key topic for us. But I do think I agree with Mark and Emma that, ironically, the technology advancements, it isn't all about technology. It's about governance, and it's about law enforcement, and it's about the government helping, and also public and private partnerships like LORCA and like us working with the Bank of England and other banks, as we do all the time in the cyber realm. So.
Yeah, and Paul, talk to me about that supply chain that you mentioned there, because that has the potential to be pretty vulnerable, doesn't it? I mean, how do we get the assurances that we need about supply chains, other suppliers, third-party providers in that chain? Because we know you've got to open this up, and there are potential risks by having it open like that.
Really, really good point there. I think it's one of the biggest challenges we're facing, if I'm honest. It's certainly within the top, 3 or 4 challenges. And I don't think we can do it individually. I think we do need to do it the collective, as Charles was saying. I really do think we need the support of the regulators. The regulators have been working really well over the past few years in the UK, for sure. And they've been raising the standard because, for example, they test all the financial services institutions in, the stress test from a cybersecurity perspective with things like CBEST. And I think initiatives like that have been really helpful. So yeah, I think the regulators can really help. I think better sharing, as was mentioned earlier, and not everyone does share. So I do think, there should be some legislation, some regulation in order to force people, when incidents happen, as they do, we really need to be sharing some of the information on that. And I also think raising the bar and the accreditations around people's cybersecurity capability is a big thing. So yeah, there's a few things there I think that can help.
Yeah, and Mark, we've highlighted the problems, we've highlighted the challenges and the sort of issues that need to be overcome. I wonder what is being done maybe right now, or will be, top of the to-do list as far as, rebuilding trust is concerned. How do they actually start to do this? How do you reassure people that their data is safe?
So I think part of that is making sure that you're able to summarize how it's being used. And that really starts with understanding how you're using it internally. So when you're talking about organizations, lots of the time, the challenge is to make sure you understand for some of those key business services, how you're using data. And it's to start to think about that more as a flow than something that's static and sits in one place at a time. And once you start to think of that, as Paul's highlighted, cloud will be part of the mix, other infrastructures will be part of the mix, and new technologies. But actually that shouldn't stop the way in which you start to think about this flow of data and how you share that both with the business to make sure you're secure, but also back to those endpoint customers.
And Emma, I just want to pick up on some of that digital identity stuff, particularly when it relates to things like a vaccine passport, because it feels like this could be a one-way street, that this is heading in one direction. The government may be reluctant to do it for the reasons that you've outlined. How close are we to getting there? And is it a one-way street? Is this inevitable?
I think we all want to be able to go to the pub and we all want to be able to go to restaurants, right? So I think having vaccine credentials to allow people to be able to move around in a way that we haven't been able to do over the last 12 months is going to be important. The question that I have is, does that need to be linked to an identity, digital identity? I don't think it necessarily does, because all you're doing is saying, have I been vaccinated, yes or no, not who I am. So I think there's quite a big divide between that. We actually have to separate those two things. The other thing is we have to remember that there is a massive cohort of 11% of the population can't turn on a device in the UK. We have people that are excluded from using technology for all different kinds of reasons. And so I think we're going to have to face the fact that we're going to have to use paper-based credentials in the vaccine, to prove we've been vaccinated in this space, because in the UK we don't have a digital identity system that everybody can use, so we don't have that infrastructure. So I think we're going to need to do something, whether it needs to be a technological solution, whether it needs to be linked to digital identities. That's the question mark for me.
It really is a fascinating issue, isn't it? So I know just how much the city has changed in recent years. It's got a booming technology cluster and a thriving cyber startup sector. But what is it about Manchester that makes it so appealing, and how is it cashing in on that success? Well, we've been speaking to some of the key players in the city's evolving ecosystem.
Welcome everyone to LORCA Live 2021, LORCA's flagship annual event, bringing together startups, investors, academics, policymakers, leaders and experts in the field that are working to restore trust in data and security in a year that has seen it questioned at every level in society. I'm Bina Puri, I'm Innovations and Partnership Lead for Greater Manchester Combined Authority. I lead on the digital blueprint and ambitions for Greater Manchester. I also lead on the cyber ecosystem. I'd like to extend a welcome to Councillor Elise Wilson, leader of Stockport Council and Greater Manchester Combined Authority's Economy Portfolio Lead. Councillor Elise is responsible for driving the delivery of the Greater Manchester Local Industrial Strategy and Economic Vision. Daniel Dresmer, Professor of Cybersecurity at the University of Manchester, and Dominic Eade, Director in the National Security Division of Global Enterprise BAE Systems Applied Intelligence. So, what collaboration opportunities exist for organisations to collaborate on a local, regional, and national and international level? And how can we strengthen these across Greater Manchester? For example, joint academic research, programme exchange, etc.
Yeah, so so as an organisation, so BAE Systems, we already work closely with a number of universities, and clearly we expect that to continue. And I think Manchester University in particular is a strategic partner of ours, and we, as an organisation, we sponsor a lot of PhDs. I think the way I'm going to answer this question, so the thing that's really important, I mean, in the cyber and digital industry, but in all industries, is how quickly and how well you can innovate. And my view on innovation is that it's very, very rare that somebody comes up with a complete sort of product or idea on their own. Innovation is almost entirely and always an incremental process, which is hugely driven and massively accelerated by the ability to exchange ideas with other people. And so the kind of cyber ecosystem or digital ecosystem that you're building in Manchester is so important, because BAE is obviously a big organisation, and we tend to be a prime contractor for the government organisations that we work for, both in the UK and around the world. But the objective for us is not only, we don't think we can solve all problems by ourselves. We know that we need to tap into SMEs as much as possible to get the brightest and best thinking to work against the toughest problems with. And so anything where you can support organisations being physically housed closely together, or just able to work remotely closely together on the same problems, then will be successful for everybody. So we think that there are opportunities across the industry for us as an organisation to work with industry, with small companies, and of course with our own staff to better serve our customers.
Thanks, Dom. Danny, would you like to come in?
Absolutely, man. I was talking a little earlier, about, sort of the need ways to kind of capture that innovation and drive it through. And what we've got, I mean, we've mentioned it before, but it's very much open for business even now. In fact, just before coming on this call, I was talking to our project manager, Shona Lafferty, who's bringing in new small to medium-sized enterprises who have got a little bit of interest in cybersecurity, think they might be able to do things better, might be able to grow. So we bring them into the cyber foundry. The 4 universities and the European Regional Development Fund are investing £6 million in the region to be able to do this. So the SMEs are able to come, find their ideas. They may not realize that there's an idea actually brewing under. So they meet our academic team and they have workshops together, and then where they define those ideas of how they can grow their business, perhaps even create and innovate totally new products. We are able to assign technical expertise from wherever it is, whether it's engineering, whether it's programming, perhaps it's in the the psychology of how they're actually bringing some of this tech to market in the first place, and we bring them through and able to give them technical assistance, all fully funded, So the SME is able to grow their business, bring new people in, grow their skill set as a result of the learning process. And obviously the idea is that they'll take it well beyond the Manchester region, because they're able now to do this securely and in a way which is going to give them that cyber assurance, which perhaps they didn't even know was a problem before they started.
Yeah, I was going to add, Elise, if you'd like to come in too.
Yeah, I'm just going to do a little brief history of Greater Manchester, because I think the point is it isn't Manchester, it's Greater Manchester. 10 boroughs decided that by working together, that was going to help them deliver outcomes in the best interests of the people of Greater Manchester. It isn't just Stockport Council that's doing it on their own, Stockport together with the other 9. And now that we've got Metro Mayor Andy Burnham along, we've got a group, it's a team effort. Then we have the LEP with the business voices, and that's kind of like in my world, if you like, but it's about collaboration. It's about a team effort to deliver those shared outcomes, which is for the benefit of the people of Greater Manchester. And we were the front runners on that. It comes back to doing things differently. We were doing that already, and that's how we've done with the birthplace of cooperation. It's about how we do together. So it's kind of inbred in how we are in Greater Manchester and how we want to be, and so the opportunity to collaborate and work with other people, huge, and to do it in a way that actually there's vibrancy and it's an exciting place to be. I know right now with COVID, everything's online, and that's great in some respects because you're getting people in a room together that maybe you wouldn't have been able to get in a room together as easily. But when you come to Greater Manchester and see what's available, the suburbs, the city, the differences that are there, it makes for a really exciting place to be, and a real kind of incubator for joint working, team working, creative ideas, a vibrant place to be, the cultural offer, the green space. Because I think, and I know it's old fashioned, my mum and dad used to say the same thing to me when we were a kid, but going outside and being in the park and being in the outdoors makes a big difference. And having that, and then having that culture, going into Manchester and seeing some of the museums and the cultural offer we've got, what a richness that brings to you, and eating in all the different eateries, you're part of something that is a really exciting place to be, that has really huge potential for the future, and that I'm really committed to making sure that as we're coming out of this pandemic, and we're dealing with the aftermath of Brexit, that we're going to be a really positive place to change, to innovate, to grow, and to take people with us as we're doing that. A really, hopefully, a bright future. Not to underestimate the scale of the challenge. Obviously, it is huge, but I think Greater Manchester is in a really good place going forward.
Thanks, Elise. I think certainly what we've seen during the pandemic is our ability to collaborate, our ability to work together as that ecosystem has seen the success in terms of our response and our ability to respond at pace, and specifically where it was needed. So it comes back down to the kind of conditions that we are building in Greater Manchester, which you'll see in other clusters, but what's quite unique about Greater Manchester is the conditions based on the kind of diverse sectors coming together, the kind of academia, SMEs, local government, to an extent where you don't necessarily see that anywhere else. But we've certainly, it's helped with diversity, and diversity drives innovation, collaboration drives innovation, and building those conditions have been, the reason why we're sort of at the stage we are in today, looking at those world-class ambitions, but also looking at ensuring that people and businesses are not left behind. Thanks, everybody. This has been a really brilliant and timely discussion. I'd like to thank our panelists, Councillor Elise Wilson, Danny Dresner and Dom Eid for vibrant discussions and some really great food for thought. What we can say is cybersecurity is uniquely placed to restore trust in technology and innovation. The ecosystem must use the lessons learnt from the extraordinary events of 2020 and the pandemic to inspire a more proactive approach to enshrine trust in technology and enable the innovations and breakthroughs that will define the next few years. I'd also like to close on a message of hope and final thoughts. Could I please ask each panelist to give their final thoughts on a key takeaway for LORCA Live 2021 and indeed for the sector?
So I'd say I'm in the business of people, okay? And what I've always struck me about cyber and security, online security, has been about how it's been about the people, isn't it? It's always comes back to people. And sometimes when you talk to not cyber folk, people outside of the little cyber crew about cyber, they think it's like a computer thing. They don't see it as a people thing. But the thing about people is their ability to adapt and change and do new things. You know, we were in Greater Manchester at the front of the last industrial revolution. There's absolutely no reason why Greater Manchester can't be at the forefront of the next one. And the next one's going to involve digital, and the next one is going to need cyber, and it's going to need our cyber crew and our cyber folk to kind of be part of that. And we're going to have to see more people get involved in that and be part of what that new future is going to be like. But isn't that exciting? You know, isn't that a great place to be? And you know, to be on the cusp of something that could be completely different, and the next generations that are going to see that come through and be part of making that happen. That's really quite exciting.
Thank you, Elise. Danny, can I go to you next?
Yes, well, I mean, absolutely. I've been following on from just what Elise said. Scientist James Lovelock describes this now. You know, we've gone beyond the industrial side of stuff, and we're now entering the epoch of the Anthropocene. You know, where people are centered, and we're able to make a difference. So, you know, cybersecurity, huge subject. I haven't got you for one of my lectures here. So I would say one of the lovely things that we've got in Manchester is it's now the home of the new branch of GCHQ. Now, people often think about this and all the kind of the spy side of stuff, but the whole ethos of GCHQ is about keeping us safe. And they have a branch which specializes in cybersecurity, the National Cybersecurity Centre. And they've identified, I mentioned it earlier, these cyber essentials. It's a cyber 5 a day. So there's lots you could do to make yourself safer, or make your friends safer, or make your company safer. But at least find out about these cyber essentials, because they will make such a difference. And they might make you that little bit more inquisitive to go out and find out what you can continue to do and get better and better. And as you get better and better, you find out how much you rely on other people and how much you need to talk to other people. And it starts to embed that community thing. So 5 cyber essentials. They're technical things, but it is information technology. We've all got to get a little bit technical sometimes. But the nice thing is, like I say, it encourages you to ask questions and to talk. And even if you just took one of them away and made yourself a little bit safer, it could be that one thing which keeps you online and keeps you connected.
Thank you, Danny. Quite a lot there. And Dom, final thoughts from you?
So I think the sort of cyber and digital industry was large and was growing very rapidly before 2020, but it was one of the few industries that you could genuinely say went even faster, as a result of quite a difficult year last year. So as we come out the other end of that, we are obviously very hopeful that the world is going to be in a much better place going forwards. But within the industry itself, we expect it to continue growing at essentially warp speed. And that's very exciting for us. It brings huge opportunities to us as an organization, but moreover, it brings huge opportunities to lots of people to have good and long lasting careers in this industry. So we're really looking forward to that over the next few years.
That's great. Thanks so much. Some really important thoughts there and food for thought to sort of take further. Thanks everyone for joining us today.
Bina, thank you so much. Bina there and her guests discussing Manchester's booming tech scene. And there is a full version of that discussion. You can look at it on the LORCA Live website, a full look at the cyber sector in Manchester and the work that is being done there. Next, hostile cyber activity. It's never far from anyone's mind, and they need to protect ourselves and our businesses from threats. But just how have the risks changed over the last year? What new threats are businesses facing, and just how can they start to protect themselves? So we've got a great panel to discuss just that. With us is Alistair Patterson. He is the Chief Executive of one of the UK's most successful cybersecurity companies, Digital Shadows. Sean John is the Director of SCI Strategic Growth Business Development at Microsoft and is one of the UK's leading security advisors. Stephen Ray is with us as well. He's the Director of the Cyber Risk Services at Deloitte. And Ruth Schofield is the UK Country Manager for Heimdall Security, the Danish cyber company. Welcome to you all. It's great to have you with us here at LORCA Live. Alistair, maybe I can start with you and talk to me about some of the threats this year, because so much has changed in 2020 and even now in 2021. Give me an overview of what has changed as far as risk is concerned.
Yeah, what a year for all of us in many ways, but certainly from a risk perspective, it's been quite a change. So I guess at the start of the pandemic a year ago, we just saw this huge shift to remote working overnight. So people rolling out VPNs, people accelerating their digital transformation programs and pushing a lot more into the cloud potentially than ever before. So that was really interesting from the perspective of the threat environment that we're monitoring all of the time. We've seen a big spike in attacks on the VPNs themselves, and the access is being sold to those. So to give you an example, our researchers were recently reporting there's now VPN accounts typically trading for about $3,000 per account. So we think of them as kind of a silver bullet for security. There's lots of people giving access away out there. Beyond that, there's an interesting sort of ethical debate on some of the underground forums and marketplaces about whether it is ethical to be attacking things like impersonating things like the vaccine distribution and, providing, misleading information, impersonating the CDC and WHO and others online. So it's very interesting to see the two ethical sides of that play out on the underground. But certainly, we've seen a variety of scams and phishing sites set up as a result. And in particular, attacks on executives have gone up because everyone is now outside the perimeter. So really interesting suite of changes and challenges in the threat environment for 2020 and I think into 21, of course, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean, talk to me about, an unprecedented year, but I wonder whether, some of the risks that were outlined there are unprecedented or whether they are the same old problems and they've just gained a bit of traction and a bit of speed.
Yes and yes. Yes and yes, really. So they are a variant of several problems, but it's a nature of scale and focus. So as Alistair says, there's a massive attack surface for people going home, with people not necessarily being set up for remote working in the way that they were. And although there are security capabilities that enable it, they were relying on things like VPNs and elements like that. And then seeing things like ransomware, which has been around for a while, quite a while now, but that really has taken off over the last year as well because of the real opportunity to engage with it. You talk about the ethical debate. We definitely saw in the early days of the pandemic attacks, ransomware attacks, forget about the impersonation, actual attacks on healthcare providers, on research institutes, on those that were providing that environment. So it is more of the same, but there's a different scale and a different focus that's really come in the last year.
Yeah, Stephen, when we look at sort of the demand for your services, I wonder what that tells you about what's happened over the last year. Where are you seeing an increase in demand? What are your clients telling you they need help with right now?
Yeah, interesting question. Something we've actually been doing a bit of work on recently. It's coming to our end of financial year, so we're planning for the new year. We'll be looking across all of our client requirements and starting to map that against recruitment needs. We've about 500 people working in cyber risk services across the UK. Interesting, 40% of the demand we see are for cloud security architecture or DevSecOps, and being able to help people build out secure infrastructure and secure products and secure applications. And there's definitely a demand shift to be go further left into the development of solutions and make sure that they're done securely. There still is demand for privacy specialists, identity specialists, defense specialists that can do monitoring and response to threats. But I think that's a key trend around cloud security architecture and DevSecOps.
Yeah, and Ruth, from your point of view, I wonder whether there's a danger in all of this that, you know, maybe security teams within organisations forget some of the basics because their, you know, attention is being diverted elsewhere because of all these new opportunities and all these new risks that are opening up. You know, is there a danger that we forget the basics? Yeah, Sean, sorry, Ruth, let me just jump in. I think you may still be on mute. I'm sorry. It wouldn't be a video call with that. There we go.
I do apologise. Yeah, I still really agree. I think, you know, I think one of the things that we've seen is that the cyber criminals are focusing on basics. They're very much looking at going back to traditional ways, ransomware attacks, phishing attacks, and as custodians of cyber in our each of us on this call and many others in that game, I think it's really important that we encourage organisations to not lose that focus on the basics as well. Some of the basics can be wrapped in slightly more complex clothing, if you like. And I think what we're seeing is some of those, you know, some of those kind of trends that we consider to be basic things like threat prevention, for example, or threat detection, sort of evolve into the more proactive and preventative measures. So particularly, you know, one of the things that we're seeing growing is instead of organisations detecting and responding to the cyber threats, is actually becoming much more proactive and looking at how they can prevent those threats in the first place. And the easiest analogy I have is, you know, we're all piling to get into the nightclub and the bouncers on the door are busy searching through the queue, trying to find the bad guys and stop them going into the nightclubs so they don't have to then go in and find them and throw them out against something that's very close to, of course, all our hearts on this call, as we're desperate to get back into nightclubs again. But yeah, I think we are really, really, you know, it's really important that we don't take our eye off the ball when it comes to focusing on those basics.
Yeah, a great analogy, and one, as you said, that relevant to everyone on this call. But, you know, Alistair, it's always the challenge as well, isn't it, that actually the crime is moving more quickly than the solution. So it's, you know, the cyber crime is always one step ahead of the cyber security. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think it's a constant arms race on both sides. I think that every time there's a new technology that's developed, there seems to be a set of criminal activity around it, and then the security industry scrambles to catch up. But I think fundamentally the security industry often does have solutions, but when you look at what's actually being rolled out effectively in organizations, it takes a lot longer for that to take place. Going back to what Ruth said, I think getting the basics right is still number one for a lot of companies, and I think in the current environment that still matters. Although the shift is now going to be going back into the workplace, and what do we do to deal with this hybrid environment that we're suddenly all going to be subject to? Because the old risks haven't gone away, and the new risks are still here as well. So it's that's the challenge we will see coming forward now.
Yeah, and Ruth, when an organisation is looking at those risks, what should they be prioritising? What is the biggest concern for most businesses right now?
Well, we've certainly seen a massive acceleration towards cloud adoption, as I'm sure everybody else on this call has. You know, mobilising a workforce is literally impossible if you aren't able to adopt cloud and move to cloud and secure your cloud environment very, very quickly. So I think that's certainly, you know, one of the trends that we've sort of seen. Organisations seeking to do more with less because of the financial constraints as well, so moving to consolidated and unified security products. But the really interesting one for me is sort of going back to the basics, is focusing on the access governance. You know, one of the things that we're really seeing a huge trend in is attacks linked to sort of people that don't have those controls around basic access, and being able to empower and optimize employees without actually constraining them and making that, sort of a difficult working environment for employees to, to survive in. So I think certainly that's one of the areas that we're seeing an awful lot of growth in right now. And that's pretty tricky because a lot of organizations, are very severely constrained from a regulatory perspective around things like how they control users' access to certain applications, and how they keep a track on that. So it's a bit of a double whammy for a lot of companies right now. But it's actually a very, very basic issue to fix. And there are some fantastic, solutions and advice out there in the market right now for companies to be able to gather their thoughts and look at how they can go ahead and really solve those problems. So yeah, that's certainly something that, that we're seeing a lot of companies adopt or look towards adoption of.
Yeah, and Sian, I'm interested in the idea that, overnight businesses have essentially thrown open their doors and allowed people to work in ways that they've never worked before. And there's quite clearly a demand to have access to the systems that they would be able to access in the office. And yet at the same time, there is, of course, clearly that need for security. And the two sort of seem to come in conflict, don't they? And you wonder who is responsible for saying, yes, you can do this, but at the same time, you can't do that because we need to make it secure.
Yeah, it's not one size fits all. So there's been a very big difference between those companies that had gone through a digital transformation and those that hadn't, particularly in terms of cybersecurity. So how reliant were you on everyone sitting in the office for security? And many organisations, my own included, but also quite a few of our customers, had actually done that digital transformation where the cybersecurity didn't rely on the network. So effectively, the fact that you remote didn't have an impact. The impact was that everything was built around the assumption that 80% of your employees would be sitting in an office at any one time, and you'd have 20% mobile. And so suddenly VPNs couldn't cope, the architecture couldn't cope. There are ways of dealing with it, and there are ways of engaging with it. And the whole challenge we're seeing now really underlines why the principles of zero trust have become so popular over the last few years, because and think of it as an architectural principle, not a product, because every organization will try and talk about it, but that idea of having to explicitly verify, having least privilege, and assuming compromise at any time. So going back to Ruth's analogy of the nightclub, yes, check on the way in, so explicitly verify that you're allowed into that nightclub. But once you're in, you're only allowed into the bits you're allowed to. You don't get automatically into the VIP area. And I'm going to assume that you've maybe all got COVID, so you all got to wear masks and, take tests or things like that. And so there's no standing access, and that's the principle now. Because there's quite a few success stories in security. There's quite a few times where if you look at spam, you go back, for those of us that are old enough, 15, 20 years, that was a massive issue, and it's just not now because security technology deals with it and people move on. So that's always going to happen. People are going to change the methodology they use as one gets locked down. But if you take those principles of you have to explicitly verify access, you have to make sure that once you've got access, you only get access to what you absolutely need, and you're going to assume that you might be compromised, then that allows you to be more flexible and deal with these things.
That's the 2021 updated analogy, isn't it, Sian? Thank you. Stephen, look, when you're talking to clients, what is the biggest bit of advice you can give them right now? Because we know, don't we, it's a given, so much has changed, but what should you tell them? What should they be worried about?
The one big bit of advice is just to think through and plan for what they're going to do when the worst happens. So make sure that they have exercise, make sure they've got a playbook, make sure they know what to do when that rowdy individual does appear in the nightclub and starts causing chaos, that they've got a well plotted through plan to recover and respond to that.
This analogy will run it. Thanks to you all, to Ruth, to Sian, to Alistair, and to Stephen. Really grateful for your thoughts this afternoon. Thanks for joining us at LORCA Live. Really great to see you. Now, for our final session of the afternoon, I want to look at the work that is being done to address some of the risks that we have just highlighted. To do that, let me introduce Sanjay Poonen. Now, Sanjay is the Chief Operating Officer for VMware. That's one of the world's leading software companies. Sanjay's CV is a real who's who of US tech. He's worked for Microsoft, for Apple, for Symantec, and for SAP. He has an MBA from Harvard Business School and a master's from Stanford. And with that sort of experience, I'm delighted to say that Sanjay is going to give us some insight into helping business take a more proactive approach to cyber. So Sanjay, welcome to LORCA Live. Thanks for being with us. Talk to me first of all about driving this push, what VMware is doing to push into intrinsic security, and maybe explain for us why that's different from some of the previous strategies.
Thank you, Vince, for having me. Don't believe anything that was said about my background. I'm honored to be with you. The key here is the bad guys haven't kept, dull. Your panel before was talking about it during the pandemic. While the world was locked down, they were looking for ways to have nation state actors. If you look at SolarWinds, and of course prior to that, WannaCry and Petya, phishing attacks, everything has just gotten a whole new scheme. And we think a new approach is needed that's more end-to-end. A lot of the way in which security has been done is today there's about 5,000 different tools that people can pick from. And if you were to basically go to a doctor and ask her how to stay healthy, and she said you had to eat 5,000 tablets, it's just not humanly possible. So you kind of make health part of your diet, and then you may have 3 to 5 supplemental vitamins. And I think the lesson to that in security is we've got to make this a lot more of a platform, and then you may need 3 or 5 supplemental tools. And that's what we've been doing, trying to create an end-to-end zero trust security platform that has a lot of security baked into it. And that we think is better equipped to fight the bad guys.
Yeah, and talk to me, because I know you were speaking to, 1,000 CISOs, weren't you, about security within a business and the approach that they had perhaps previously. Talk to me about how that maybe is changing.
Yeah, Vince, I set a goal last year when COVID struck and we were all sort of sheltered in place to try and talk to 1,000 CISOs over Zoom. I didn't quite get to 1,000, but I got to 700. And it's easier to do these over these video conferences because you could schedule in 30 days, and I can go in 30 seconds from London to India to Singapore to Seoul to Tokyo and come back to my room. And it's interesting, when we talk to them, clearly this is a top boardroom topic right now. The chief security officer's role has gotten more important. They are starting to report to the audit committee. Now they have often a connection directly from the board to them, even if they're buried 2 or 3 levels. And I think chief security officers have to act a lot more like business leaders than just sort of people spouting off all these terms that nobody understands. Because when you get to the boardroom, people are going to ask you, am I safe, am I not safe? So that's one. And secondly, they really respected the sort of platform approach, because I think it takes a new way in which you combat this. And third, I think SolarWinds was a wake-up call, because this was a nation state, almost like a terrorist type of attack, very involved, very hard to detect because it's embedded inside a software supply chain. And this requires all of us as a village to combat security in a very different way.
Yeah, and is this pandemic, good news or bad news as far as, raising awareness, making business leaders think about it in a different way? I mean, look, the idea of you paint a picture and make it sound very simple, that of course it should be the very nature of a business that they are secure and that cybersecurity is the forefront of their mind. We know, though, the reality is when you're trying to navigate a business and run a business, there are so many competing interests on your time and attention. Does the pandemic put that into the spotlight and say, you need to deal with this right now?
Yeah, I think, if you think about that employee that went home now, and, when you thought about a branch in the past, you may have had 100 or 1,000 people working in your branch offices. Now it's a branch of one, an employee working at home. They take their laptop, maybe it's a Dell laptop, or maybe it's a phone that they have, and you want to make sure that that laptop, as it's accessing its applications, is secure. But you can't bring all of the security equipment to the person's home. So you want to make sure that now that access, even if it's a new employee who's shipped a laptop and within 15 minutes needs to get up and running, their experience of how they get to their applications, whether it's an application that's on the web, we call it a SaaS application, or it's an application that needs to kind of go back through the company's data center, it's just simple. It should be as easy as being able to access. We call it consumer simple while not compromising enterprise security. That's one. Secondly, I dream of a world where we don't have to remember all of these passwords. I mean, when you think about passwords, everyone has their favorite way in which they're storing their passwords. Pieces of paper or a file, those are not secure. But in the future, with multi-factor authentication, which is, a fingerprint or a retina scan, Vince, you'd have to cut my thumb off and pluck my eye out to be Sanjay Poonen. And I double dare you to do both of those, right? So I dream of a world where things like passwords just become so easy and you don't have to remember them, because with phones and with multi-factor authentication, things have become easy. These are just two. We could go on and on, but there's simple ways by which when we follow this employee as they went home, how do we make it consumer simple yet enterprise secure?
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you that, what is the one thing that would make everybody's life easier? What is the game changer as far as security is concerned? And I suppose, within a relatively small timescale.
I think one is this: when you think about all of how a user uses applications in their home life, that we take away all of this, because security is often like a brake. Business people are trying to go faster, which is the accelerator of the car. And if you're constantly having to put the brake on, you're not letting them use applicant. Often people feel like security is like a brake. It's stopping them from doing things faster and better. We've got to make people feel, listen, protection's part of the car. We're going to detect when something happens. And that happens because just like a car, you automatically detect your cameras. I think the world's becoming one where analytics, data collected from a lot of these potential threats, allows a system to be very smart about detecting possible threats ahead of time. And it's a lot like disease research. There's a lot of parallels between security and healthcare. In the world of healthcare, part of the reason we've been able to do vaccine research so fast, or I hope in this decade there's a cure for forms of cancer or Alzheimer's disease, because you're taking large amounts of genome data or DNA sequencing and running AI algorithms on it. The same thing applies to security. We're collecting, and many other companies are collecting, vast amounts of data from a variety of the telemetry, endpoints, network points, cloud, and so on and so forth. And that's a treasure trove of places by which it's not personal information that's confidential. It's metadata that allows you to get sense of events, and from that you're better able to do it. So I do think that analytics and AI technology will allow us to better combat these type of threats in the future.
Yeah, and on that issue of a break, because so much has changed, hasn't it? And businesses really tapping into that opportunity that is presented by remote working, as you just highlighted, able to talk to people around the world in a matter of minutes. But how much of a break is that security question and the security concerns to really harness that power of remote working?
I think that, when we think about the world in the future post the pandemic, let's say a significant part of the world is vaccinated and will come back, I do think we have a hybrid world for the rest of our life. And there's a couple of things that are going to be immutable that I believe will be part of our life going forward. Are you able to hear me, Vince?
Yeah, I can. Sorry, I can. Yeah, I was just talking to the team.
No, I wondered if we'd lost connection for a second, the world of remote work here. But nonetheless, I think that the future will be, in the past, if you were working remotely, you felt like a second-class citizen relative to people who are working in the office. Going forward, every meeting will need to have a Zoom or a Teams call with a video connection at home. We've all become mini producers in our home. I'm talking to you remotely with just a microphone and a camera. And the same thing in schools. Imagine when kids are sick, if they had to go home to recover for a couple of days from just the common flu, the teacher has a microphone and a video, and the kid didn't miss a day or an hour of education. This is the world we live in. And I think as you start to factor that in every country in the world with video collaboration, I mean, this type of technology, Zoom or Teams, is like having the old telepresence on a phone. And I think that's going to fundamentally change a lot of the way we both communicate and work, but also in other areas, how we worship, how we play, how we watch sports, everything's going to change.
It absolutely is fascinating, isn't it? Sanjay, thank you so much. It's been really interesting to talk to you about the work that you're doing and quite how important some of these changes will be, and whether we will look back in years to come and think just how fundamental and how radical 2021 was when it came to changing quite how much we take for granted now.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Thanks so much. Lovely to see you. And thank you for everyone who's been watching at home. I know if you're in the UK, we're contending with some lovely weather outside right now. So I hope we haven't kept you from the sunshine for too long. But over the course of these 2 days, we've looked back at the uncertainty of the last 12 months. We've also looked ahead to what 2021 may bring. Now, tomorrow, for the final session of LORCA Live, we're going to venture a little further into the future. We're going to assess what cyber may look like in 10, 20, or even 50 years' time. A terrifying thought. As ever, though, all content will be available on the website, lorcalive.co.uk. Please register to join our workshops that will be running for the duration of the event. Thank you for now for watching. Remember, keep your comments, questions or thoughts coming in. You can use the Q&A box on the LORCA Live website. But enjoy your evening, enjoy some sunshine if you have it, and we'll see you back here, same time tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Bye-bye.